If you have ever been told that you are broken, sinful, or lost, and that only a Savior can fix you, this episode is for you. Today, we're unpacking where that idea comes from, why it feels convincing, and whether it actually holds up. This isn't an attack on belief. It's a conversation about responsibility, human nature, and whether meaning really requires being saved. Hello, I am CJ Everson, and welcome to The Jewish Skeptic. Let me start by saying this clearly, because tone matters. This episode is not an attack on believers. It's not mockery, and it's not about disrespecting anyone's faith. This is about ideas, specifically the idea that human beings are fundamentally broken, morally incapable, or spiritually lost, and therefore require a Savior to be whole. Because once you slow that idea down, it raises a serious question. What problem is a Savior actually solving? Most people hear the word Savior and immediately think of morality. They're told, without God, you wouldn't know right from wrong. Without God, people would be chaos. Without a Savior, humans are just evil. But notice something important. Those claims assume guilt before evidence. They assume brokenness before diagnosis. They assume failure before explanation. And to me, that's backwards. In everyday life, we don't start with the cure and work backwards to invent the disease. We identify the problem first. So let's do that. What exactly is the human problem that requires salvation? Is it morality? Because humans demonstrate moral behavior across cultures, religions, and even in people with no religious belief at all. Is it ignorance? Because ignorance is solved with education, not worship. Is it suffering? Because suffering is a fact of biology, not proof of a spiritual failure. Is it guilt? Because guilt is a psychological and social emotion, not evidence of cosmic debt. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The Savior narrative only works after you accept a very specific story about human nature. That story says you are born flawed, your nature is corrupt, your judgment is completely unreliable, and your desires are just dangerous. And also that your morality is insignificant. And therefore, you must submit to a external authority to be made whole. To me, that's not a neutral claim. That's not self-evident. That is a theological assertion. And theology is not evidence. Now, let's talk about something people rarely admit out loud. The Savior model is not universal across human history. Most human societies did not view people as depraved. They viewed people as social, cooperative, responsible, capable of empathy, and capable of harm and care. Anthropology shows us something important: that moral systems existed long before any salvation theology came about. The hunter-gatherer societies regulated behavior through reputation, kinship, shared survival, and empathy. Not some external punishment, not from original sin, as some of y'all call it, and definitely not from a divine rescue. So when people say you need a savior, what they're really saying to me is, you need to accept my framework for understanding what it means to be human. And that's fine as a personal belief. But it's not a universal truth. And it's not a requirement for meaning, morality, or responsibility. Here's where the conversation usually turns emotional, because the savior idea feels comforting to people. It gives suffering meaning. It gives guilt relief. It gives chaos a narrative. But comfort is not the same as truth. And here's the critical issue. The savior model removes responsibility while claiming to increase morality. Now think about it. If your morality fails as a result of human nature, and your redemption comes from an external figure, then accountability is always partially outsourced. And mistakes become, oh, I'm only human. Or my flesh is weak. Or I need forgiveness. Instead of, I caused this harm. I need to repair it. I need to change my behavior. That's not accountability. That's mitigation. Now, contrast that with a non-savior framework. If there is no cosmic rescuer, then your choices are yours. Your harm is yours. Your responsibility is yours. No forgiveness without accountability. No moral reset button. That's not nihilism. That's maturity. Here's something people don't like to hear. A world without a savior demands more moral seriousness, not less. Because you don't get to offload your failures onto metaphysics. You don't get to blame sin on nature. You don't get to wait for divine correction. You have to deal with consequences here and now. This is why the claim that atheism leads to immorals, but to me, that doesn't hold up. Atheism doesn't remove morality. It removes the excuses. And that's uncomfortable for people who are used to moral safety nets. Now let's talk about faith. Faith is often praised as a virtue, but faith is not evidence. And faith is not a moral action. Faith is a psychological posture. Trust without significant evidence. That can be comforting. It can be meaningful. But it is not a reliable path to truth. And when faith becomes the foundation of morality, something dangerous happens. Beliefs become immune to correction. Because once something is grounded in faith, doubt becomes weakness. Questioning becomes rebellion. Disagreement becomes moral failure. And that's not morality. That's authority preservation. A morality that requires faith to function cannot be evaluated, corrected, or improved. A morality grounded in human well-being can. Now, let's talk about human nature, but without theology for a moment. Humans are not blank slates, but we are also not born evil. We are born with empathy, emotions, social bonding, fairness, instincts, and even conflict tendencies. Psychology and neuroscience show that moral behavior is not injected from above. It emerges from brain development, social learning, emotional regulation, and culture norms. Children demonstrate empathy way before any religious instruction. They respond to distress instinctively. They understand fairness at an early age. That alone dismantles the idea that morality requires salvation. Now let's address the claim that humans are broken. Broken compared to what? A perfect being? An impossible standard? A moral fantasy? If the benchmark is perfection, then yes, everyone simply fails. But that's not a realistic metric. That is a theological one. Humans are exact what you'd expect. I mean, they're exactly what you'd expect. Evolved organisms shaped by survival pressures, capable of cooperation and conflict. No savior required. No cosmic explanation needed. And here's the part that usually tends to get ignored. A savior narrative often creates the wound and then claims to heal it. You are told that you are broken, therefore you need saving. And without that, the need disappears. That's not healing. That's dependency. Healthy systems empower people to take responsibility for their lives. Unhealthy systems convince people they are incapable without authority. This is why savior narratives persist. They don't just offer comfort, they offer control. If you accept that, you can't be trusted without your own moral reasoning. You will always defer to someone else. That's not humility. That's learned helplessness. So let's end with the big question. If there's no Savior, what's left? Well, I'll tell you what's left. Meaning, responsibility, agency, choice. Meaning doesn't come from being rescued. It comes from participation, from relationships, from internal growth, from repair, from honesty, from effort. And responsibility becomes real when there's no divine safe net. When your actions matter because this life matters. Here's the quiet truth. You don't need a savior to care about others. You don't need a savior to act ethical. You don't need a savior to find meaning. You don't need a savior to take responsibility for your own life. You need self-awareness, empathy, accountability, curiosity, and even humility. Those are human traits. This doesn't mean that belief is stupid. It just means that belief is optional at this point. And optional things cannot be moral requirements. So when I say I don't need a savior, and neither do you, I'm not saying you're wrong for believing. I'm simply saying you are capable without it. And that might be the most radical idea of all. If you disagree with what I said today, that's okay. The goal here isn't agreement. It's honesty. And if we're going to talk about belief, morality, and responsibility, we owe it to each other to be clear about what we're actually claiming and why. Think it through. Question it. Sit with it. And I'll see you on the next one. Remember, no fear, no dogma, just clarity. I'm CJ Everson, and I'm the Jewish skeptic. Until next time.
Do you know what I found? The more you know, the less you know.